All right, well, good morning, everyone. It's just about 11 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. My name is Don Olson, and I'm on the Adult Education Committee here at Fourth Presbyterian Church. And we are in the middle of a three-part series. Oh, here? Okay, is that better? Okay, sorry about that. All right. We're in the middle of a three-part series on the Presbyterian Church U.S.A's or PCUSA's, our denominations, pushback on the Project 2025, which is essentially the Heritage Foundation's blueprint for consolidation of executive power, executive branch power. And a lot of that's already been implemented. So last week we heard from Andrew Peterson about the denomination's national efforts. Today we are blessed to hear from David Greising, who is not only a member of this congregation, but also the president and CEO of the Better Government Association. He and Pastor Joe Morrow will talk about pushback efforts at the state and local levels. David's had a storied career as a journalist, member of a number of publications, including Chicago Tribune and others. But one that might not be noted otherwise is he was the editor of the DePauw magazine, our alma mater. So I'm very proud of that. And just wanted to note, next week the series will conclude with Pastor Danette Sawyer educating us on pushback efforts from other faith communities around us. So with that, I'll start with a word of prayer by Doug Hammarskjöld. You who are over us, you who are one of us, you who are within us, may all see you in me also. May I prepare the way for you. May I thank you for all that shall fall to my lot. May I never forget the needs of others. Give me a pure heart that I may see you, a humble heart that I may hear you, a heart of love that I may serve you, a heart of faith that I may abide in you. Amen. I'll turn it over to Pastor Joe.
Thank you, Don. Good morning, everyone, and again, welcome to this third session, second session. That one's coming next week, right? Welcome to the second session in our Pushback 2025 series. I'm really delighted to be in conversation with David this morning. You have a number of interesting ties to folks within the Fourth Church community. And David and I have an interesting tie in that many, many years ago, before I ever had a thought of going into pastoral ministry, I did have an interest in public life, political life, and what goes on in local politics. And so I signed up to be an intern at an organization that I think I found off the internet called the Better Government Association when I was in college, and became a summer intern there for 2 summers, and really cut my teeth on the investigative journalism that I learned there, all of the techniques of research, particularly when it comes to things that happen in the public interest and local government and governance. So I have a lot to thank the BGA for many of the skills that I've built on in years since to really do the work of ministry when it comes to community engagement. So grateful for those ties to the Better Government Association from many years ago.
We were blessed to have you, no doubt. It was before my time, but I've heard stories that you were just a great intern.
Oh, yeah, well, I've learned. All right, I'll give you the money later, right? No, in classic Chicago style, right? Well, I did want to kick us off in this conversation with a nod to Scripture. Of course, we're having this conversation in a church, and we should, as I think Andrew led us and Pastor Rocky led us last week, to think about what we're doing theologically. So I want to ground this conversation around what is happening at the local level, what is happening with regard to Project 2025 here in Chicagoland, with a nod to Scripture. And this comes from the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah tells us, or he tells the exiles who find themselves in Babylon, to build houses and live in them, Plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find its welfare, your welfare. Let me read that again. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. Amen? So as we think about what it means to seek the welfare of our city, much of that implies knowledge of what our city needs and what our neighbors need, what is most near and dear to their hearts, and where they struggle and how they struggle. And so a lot of the conversation that we're going to have today is about increasing our own knowledge of what our neighbors here in Chicago are experiencing, the distress they experience, the challenges they experience, and what's required to faithfully and fruitfully respond to those challenges. Here at Fourth Presbyterian Church, we have a number of community partners that we have been doing work with, especially throughout the last couple of years. Many of them are grantee partners, meaning we grant them funds to be able to pursue specific projects around topics like, or subjects like, anti-violence or violence prevention, housing equity, health and wellness, sort of anti-poverty work. So many of the big challenges of our time. And we not only give money, but we give time. We give presence. We show up at their community gatherings. We ask them about their challenges and struggles and seek to amass all of our resources to try to respond to them. So as we talk, David and I, today, I want you to keep in mind some of these partners. I'm going to read off to you the list of current grantees. These are grantees that we started working with in 2024 and continue to work with them in various ways today. But I want you to hear the names of these organizations and the neighborhoods that they're working in so that you can have a little bit of a grounding as to the implications of many of the policy issues that we're going to be talking about today. So those partners include Boxing Out Negativity, a youth boxing program in North Lawndale; Sister Afia, a mental health program in Greater Grand Crossing and Chatham on the south side; Imagine Inglewood If in the Inglewood neighborhood on the south side; the Firehouse Community Arts Center in North Lawndale; Learning Edge Tutoring operating in Austin and Oak Park; Breakthrough Urban Ministries in Garfield Park; Deborah's Place offering housing for women in Garfield Park; Inspiration Corporation operating out of Garfield Park; the Night Ministry, which operates citywide; and U.S.A. In North Lawndale and the Riverdale neighborhoods. We've also partnered in the past with and continue to be in relationship with the St. Sabina Parish in Auburn Gresham, Interfaith Housing Development Corporation, which works citywide and is building permanent supportive housing with us in Garfield Park; Sarah Circle in Uptown, Lincoln Park Community Services in Lincoln Park, Northwestern Hospital here downtown. So these are just a few of the partners that we have worked with locally. I think you should be proud of the work that we do, but also to recognize that many of the policies happening at the federal level impact and trickle down to those partners, not just each of us in the room, but those who were resourcing in very critical ways. So just wanted to lift that up as we begin our conversation today. So as we shift gears, David, and I know there's lots that we can talk about with regard to policy, I thought a good starting place might be a September column that you wrote for the Chicago Tribune. And in it, you're referencing not only what's happening with the National Guard and the prospect of the Guard coming to Chicago, but also many of the other policy-related issues that are coming down from the federal government. And here's what you had to say. So whether in the form of the big, beautiful bill or Trump's many executive orders, the president's policies could cost Illinois billions over time. They could erode the state's credit rating, lead to hospital closures, allow the invasive Asian carp to enter Lake Michigan, and cause Illinois farmers to lose access to their biggest foreign market in China. The list goes on. And as serious as military action against the state's biggest city would be, the policy incursions already in place are real. They're more than just words. So let's begin with some of the potential policy costs that you outlined in that column. Can you tell us about the various challenges the state faces because of the president's executive orders?
That paragraph just kind of ticks them off, and if I could just add, those are the ones that have emerged since President Trump took office, and no doubt there will be more to come. What was not included in that is news just last week that $2 billion in funding for the CTA Red Line extension is being put on hold indefinitely, but the Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy has said that the department is going to study the city of Chicago's policies on minority contracting, which they call race-based policy. And it's a particularly interesting case study in that before President Biden left office, he took a very important formal step to legally commit the federal government to funding the CTA Red Line extension to the order of $2 billion. I've been watching that case closely because President Trump, of course, with his executive orders, et cetera, has not exactly followed the law to the letter. Let's just put it that way. This is a case in which he is defying the law. It is a temporary hold, so we don't know ultimately whether these funds will be permanently withdrawn or not. But if they are, it will be yet another case in which he is expecting to go to the courts, expecting likely to lose at the circuit court level, but then the long game that he is playing is to bring things to the Supreme Court, where he expects a friendly hearing. You mentioned the idea of supreme executive authority. This legal theory called the unitary executive theory, which essentially reads the Constitution in a novel way that people really hadn't heard of several years ago. It's really taken root in conservative legal circles, and notionally, and very simply put, it basically gives the president unrivaled power to control everything in the federal bureaucracy, and in some instances even to defy Congress. And so we're seeing this play out in a number of different ways. That paragraph you read mentioned farmers in the southern part of the state. Well, that's $1 billion worth of revenue to China alone. China essentially has cut off all imports of soybeans from the U.S. Illinois exports about 10% of the total U.S. Export of soybeans. And so that's going to affect farmers across Illinois. Another factor is the Medicaid cuts are putting a number of hospitals at risk, about 9 hospitals in rural Illinois. And these are hospitals that serve broad communities, and in most cases, hospitals in rural areas are the single largest employer. And so there are economic impacts that no doubt will be felt. We had Congressman Danny Davis went on a tour, I think in the last week or two, of about 5 what are called safety net hospitals in the city of Chicago, which are facing serious financial problems already. the cut to Medicaid funding. One of the hospitals, Loretto Hospital on the west side, 80% of its revenue comes from people who benefit from Medicaid services. And so this is going to basically, these hospitals are kind of not very healthy financially to begin with. We've already seen a hospital, not a safety net hospital, but Weiss Hospital closed down in the last couple weeks because of funding related issues. And some of these hospitals will be very seriously impacted. You mentioned these community partners. One of the things that Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, is continually bringing into this conversation with regard to the National Guard and the threat of National Guard being sent into Chicago, which the president just renewed in the last few days. And Governor Pritzker has said he's expecting 300 National Guard to be entering Chicago at some point soon. And Mayor Johnson has continually said, well, you know, you can help us. You can help us by funding the programs that you had been funding, and you put a stop on the funding for these social programs. This community violence intervention stuff is actually working. Mayor Johnson has set a goal of no more than 400 homicides in Chicago for 2025. That's down from around 800 homicides in 2020 and 2021, which is a recent high. It had spiked up to that level. That hasn't been typical. Typically, prior to 2020, it was more in the high 600s. And so this community violence work that some of your community partners and others are doing is having significant effect. Private sources in the state of Illinois have contributed more than $500 million to CVI, community violence intervention programs, and we're seeing the results of that. But the pullback on federal funding is probably affecting a bunch of these community partners.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
In fact, we had one that actually pulled out of being able to fund a specific program that we were looking to fund this year, and said, no, we can't do that anymore because the other funding that we were essentially hoping for and expecting didn't come through. And so our small grant is not going to be enough to save that particular program. So that means students, young people who won't have access to a program that they had access to last year.
Right. And I mean, that's really regrettable. As part of my job, I get out in these communities on a fairly regular basis. I meet with some of these organizations and see the good work that they're doing. Some of them will still be able to carry on because of the private and state and local money that will go toward them, but not all of them will. And even those that are able to carry on will be weakened because they're no longer receiving federal funding. And the pretext that the president is using about defending safety, public safety, what he called shipocalypse now or something like that?
Shipocalypse now.
Yeah. That image of Chicago is not supported by the facts, but now that there are some disputes around ICE activity has led to, in some isolated cases of violence, that likely could provide the pretext that the president legally could use in order to send the Guard. If he sends the Guard in for the purposes of just quelling violence in the streets when in fact our violence numbers are improving, that likely would not stand up to court review. But as we have violence around some of the ICE activity, and again, this is not mass violent revolution, which is one of the legal determinants of the president's right to send the Guard in despite resistance from the governor. Governor Pritzker has said that he does not want the Guard in. He's done everything he can to resist having the Guard sent in. The president may actually have a pretext if we continue to see violent activity in response to what ICE is doing out in the communities.
Yeah, and we're seeing, and we can talk about this a little later too, a lot of intimidating tactics out there that are essentially, in some ways, trying to provoke a violent reaction. So we've
Right.
seen that happen in a number of cases actually
Right.
this week. I feel like we're both trying to catch up with events as they're unfolding
Yeah, I mean-
within a 7-day period.
Yeah, Joe, I want to take a step back for just a second on that point. Just keeping track of what is going on here. I remember during the first Trump term, and for the first couple of years, I was at Reuters and the global news organization, the world's largest, in fact. And every morning we had a call for the Americas editors, and it just felt like it was just overwhelming how much news just kept flowing in due to that Trump administration. And this Trump administration has taken that up by orders of magnitude. It is just going so fast. This program is about Project 2025. And not only is Project 2025 being implemented in so many respects, but Trump is improvising beyond just 2025. I do want to say the BJ is a nonpartisan organization. I'm trying to stick to the facts as we see them, as those of us who are following this news say it. I don't make judgments about what the president is doing or not because we're nonpartisan, but I do track what's going on. And in my role as a columnist for the Tribune, I'm able to express my view, but in that also I try to keep it grounded in facts. And frankly, in this case, the facts alone, you don't have to be partisan in order to draw conclusions about what the impact is being. These job losses, the impact on these organizations and the communities, et cetera, it's inarguable, and it's something that we as a community of faith here at the church, need to, I think, continue to uphold the long-standing tradition of the Presbyterian Church, really, of being socially aware and active, and using our faith in order to help uphold our moral standards and to serve the community as best we can. So we've got a question in the audience.
Thank you for that. Hold on, I'm going to come to you, Rachel.
So I have a shockingly large number of right-wing followers, and I'm always struggling to think how to respond to some of the things that they're saying, or how to say things in a way that they might respond to. And what I'm curious about is, what are the talking points from the other side as to why they think cutting funding for violence preventions is a good thing? Is it that they think government should just be out of our lives, and might we be able to induce Trump voters with good hearts to privately fund these organizations to keep them going? Or do they actually, for some reason that I don't yet understand, believe that these programs shouldn't exist? Or is it true evil, where they know they should exist and they want to cut them because they actually want citizens of color to have a worse time in life?
Good question. Yeah. What are the other arguments that you're hearing, David, in terms of or any arguments beyond sort of punitive ones, right?
Well,
about why some of these cuts are being made.
Right. Well, if you trace Project 2025 back to its origins, they can be found, I think, in large measure in kind of words expressed by people like Steve Bannon about ending like the administrative state, and of course President Trump is very informed by Steve Miller, who is an anti-immigration zealot. How much racist thinking informs either one of those people or the movement in general, I can't comment on because I don't know, but there's no doubt that the view of very influential people in the Trump administration is that there are a lot of things that the federal government was getting into that that were outside the scope of what the founders intended, I guess. But also there is a very strong view that what many would view as racially progressive policy is actually, in their view, racist policy that is anti-white. I mean, they've expressed this themselves, and so they've kind of turned the thinking of the civil rights movement on its head and said that we're against race-based policies, and that includes policies that are meant to help people who have been neglected by our government and by our society for generations, and stop that. And so that's a common thread. That's I think the rational explanation. Other parts of what the president is doing, I think, are also founded on kind of his honest belief, for example, with tariffs that have such an impact on farmers and also manufacturing in Illinois. I think he really believes tariffs are, the rest of the world's been taking advantage of the United States. We need to raise tariffs in order to fight back. I think he really believes that, despite the fact that economists almost unanimously disagree with him on this point. I think a lot of this, some of this is just political, and some of this I think is born like in his belief system, and I think the tariff stuff is born in his belief system.
Those are helpful distinctions, and maybe to also build on what you've been talking about with respect to equity, right? Equity across racial, social, cultural categories. I'd love to kind of go back to one of the examples you raised, for instance, with safety net hospitals, right? And the kind of role that they play within our local ecosystem of health and well-being. How are you finding cuts to things like safety net hospitals and other policies that the administration has? How are you finding those impacting communities of color here in Chicagoland, Black and brown communities in particular, lower income communities across the board, no matter what the racial or ethnic background is? How are these policies having an impact on equity?
Well, a safety net hospital is a hospital that is specifically set up to serve people who can't pay their medical bills. And they're meant to be a resource to the community because rich and poor alike, we all get sick. In the communities that safety net hospitals serve, there tends to be an inordinate amount of violence. And I mentioned Loretto Hospital. I started my professional career at the City News Bureau of Chicago, and back in those days, men worked the night shift. You would start work at 6 o'clock in the evening and work till whatever it was, 2 in the morning. And you would do, basically the police blotter was one of the big things that we did. And I remember Loretto Hospital being tied to so many shooting victims were taken to Loretto Hospital. It's in Austin. It's in an area that back then, more so even than today, a community fraught with violence. And the safety net hospitals provide services that otherwise would not be available to people in financial need, and also provide significant amount of help for people who are victims of gun crimes and other violence. And they also are significant employers, as all hospitals are, and they employ local people typically. And so they're really instrumental to the health of the communities that they serve. And so when we hear about safety net hospitals being threatened by the Medicaid cuts, it's a bigger story than just the hospitals themselves. Think in terms of the community those hospitals exist in, and the important role that they play in the health of the community, in employment, in just a sense of we're okay. We have the basic resources that we need, even in this neighborhood that's been neglected, underinvested, et cetera. And so it's a difficult time in healthcare generally. The Medicaid cuts are going to help hurt a lot of healthcare providers, but the safety net hospitals, because of the proportion of revenue that they get from Medicaid patients, are particularly vulnerable.
And I would imagine there's a domino effect, too, for other hospitals, the larger systems like the Northwesterns, the U.Chicagos, taking on perhaps more of the burden of those communities for whom those safety net hospitals are gone. It's not like you can set them back up overnight. You've got to rely on other hospitals in our broader network, which means stress on everyone who uses those hospitals too, I would imagine.
Well, not only that, Joe, but not every hospital will accept a patient. They're because of some changes in the law some years back, some of them are not legally obligated to accept certain patients. One of the reasons that a safety net hospital has that description is because they do accept people, again, regardless of ability to pay. There's also a question of expertise. Certain hospitals treat a lot of gunshot victims.
Yeah.
Not every hospital in the city has that many people in patients coming in for that kind of trauma care, and so it's also a question of, are the doctors ready to really do the best possible work on the people who are victimized in that way? Excellent
point. And I want to shift to another area that's also being impacted that has equity issues: education. Can you tell us a little bit about what might be happening in the education field as well?
Well, essentially, the Department of Education is being dismantled. And that means in part that funding that came from the Department of Education probably will be diminishing over time. What we're seeing immediately, though, and is, I think, quite important, but it hasn't received much attention, is that the Education Department has basically stopped doing research into what's going on in the schools across our country. And so there's this study that's typically was done by the Education Department called the National Assessment. I forget the full name, but it's thought of as the National Report Card that shows how students are performing on standardized tests across the country. And so when you see, for example, Illinois actually over the last 2 or 3 years has actually made some significant improvements in academic performance. We won't really know how we're doing anymore with this National Report Card being phased out. School, in terms of equitable spending on students across the state, that is going to become more difficult to track because the federal government will no longer be collecting that kind of data. There are Education Department studies on the transition services provided to people with disabilities and how successful at age 22 people with disabilities age out of the public school system. And a big part of the services provided to students during those last few years while they're in the school is, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? Right. And try to prepare those students for the rest of their lives. And measurement of the success or lack of success for those transition services is halting. And so these are some very important program, they sound like they're just academic studies or just data collection, but they have real implications in terms of policy and the services provided to people, as in the case of people with disabilities, people who have substantial needs that are quite acute, and once they turn 22, they're gone. Nobody's tracking them anymore. And so if those services aren't provided, this is kind of, for many of them, this is their last best chance for having a productive and happy life.
Yeah, and I would imagine the inability to track progress also impacts many of the students that come through here and get tutored. Many of the students that are in this room on a weekly basis and have been for decades being tutored as part of our own church ministries. The inability to be able to track their progress, to be able to know that what we're doing on a weekly basis is actually helping or not hindering or helping A enough is significant. And it seems, too, that in general there is a trend of sort of removal of data, diminishing of knowledge and the knowledge base, kind of happening throughout the federal government. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, another example as well.
Right, and it's going to have implications in a lot of different ways, but being able to track progress, as you point out, across the government, it's going to have implications in terms of investor confidence in financial data from corporations.
Mm-hmm.
The Trump administration is pushing to reduce the requirements for financial reporting. And so some of this, I don't really understand the motivation of that, because knowledge in the financial markets is really important in order to make informed decisions, and it's going to become problematic down the road. I would say that the tutoring program here at Fourth Church, my wife Cindy, who wasn't able to be here today, she had a fundraiser that she had to go to for a program our son Wes goes to. She's tutored for I think 5 or 6 years, this young woman who is, I think, going to go on to college and no doubt have a pretty successful career, I hope. That program gives us an indication of what can happen if somebody has the resources to succeed, to give them a chance to succeed. And I've been impressed by the fact that her mentee shows up every week. Her mother is very involved. She's got siblings in the program. It is, first of all, a credit to our church that we have that program, but it also just shines a light on, when I've seen how Cindy's mentee has grown over the years, I think a lot about the missed opportunity that kids whose parents didn't figure out how to get that kind of help.
How do you multiply it, right?
Right,
and,
no doubt.
And it seems as though local programs, whether it's those community-based organizations or the federal government, have resources to be able to provide for those students and to fill more of those gaps. But those resources are lessened, and we're losing them on account of what's happening with these federal policies. I want to shift gears to civil rights in a second. We'll talk a little bit about what's happening with ICE, but I do want to take some of the questions that are out here in the audience.
Hi, this is 2 parts, so bear with me with the first part. The first part is retribution and targeting certain blue states does not fall under a philosophical, I know you can't say that, a philosophical base. Okay, the second part is that it's very upsetting to hear all this. I've read it in the newspaper. I would like to focus, and I'm wondering if we're going to do that next week, on what positive things we as individuals can do. I know you're talking about what the church can do, which is really wonderful. And I thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And I realize in your position you can't say that there's pure evil going on. And I think that
But
Christ.
you can
no,
though. So.
I think that Christ acknowledged evil. And in order for us to be motivated to do something, we do have to see the evil, and without hurting the evildoer, try to go for the good.
Thank you.
Well,
Appreciate that, Catherine.
Yeah,
So,
I've got a response
yeah.
to that. Absolutely, there are things that people can do, and that goes from the highest levels of the state, the governor, to people like those of us in this room. For starters, back in January, I reviewed my columns too before we did this, and in January when Governor Pritzker was first kind of establishing himself as one of President Trump's leading critics, I pointed out kind of an example. One of the questions for me has been, it's one thing to be shaking your fist at President Trump from the governor's mansion in Springfield. It's another thing to actually do something about it. And the case that I pointed out was the way that Pritzker responded to the Dobbs ruling, the ruling that eliminated the federal right to an abortion. And he said right out of the gate, Illinois is going to be a beacon of hope for reproductive rights. But then he actually acted by putting in place some laws that protect healthcare providers, that protect people who come to this state in order to get reproductive services, a number of different actual policy responses to what he saw as an unjust ruling by the Supreme Court. And similarly, Kwame Raoul, our Attorney General in Illinois, has joined, I think, more than 20 lawsuits against President Trump in order to fight the Trump administration's efforts in the courts. And on the streets, we're seeing at around the ICE facility in Broadview, et cetera, we're seeing people take to the streets. And I think that Father Flager from St. Sabina has been involved in some of this stuff.
Yes, and one of our own Presbyterian pastors, Reverend David Black, who's been a friend of this congregation as well, and has been a part of the protests in Broadview. In fact, got a New York Times photo of being pepper sprayed.
Wow.
By,
Okay.
yeah, true story. You all can look it up.
It's one way to get your picture in the
very
paper,
powerful,
I guess. Yeah.
And very scary. Yes, so one more question, and then I want us to shift gears because we're starting to get into that territory of civil rights, and then we'll wrap up with a few other questions as well.
What part of 2025 have we not seen yet? And so what do you, I mean, have I seen the worst of this, or what else is coming here?
Good question. What else is there left in the plan?
I can't just off the top of my head say what we have not seen, just because it is so massive and it covers the gamut. And I'm sorry I don't have a very good response to your question. It's a great question. I guess what I would say is, President Trump, of course, early on sort of disavowed. He said he had nothing to do with Project 2025. It's quite clear that he's using 2025 as a roadmap. As I mentioned, he's kind of gone beyond it and has improvised toward his own objectives that may or may not be in the 2025 playbook, but there's no doubt that it is guiding a lot of what the administration is doing, and I just don't, off the top of my head, I can't give you a good response.
How far could he go, I guess is the question.
I don't know, because frankly, deconstructing the education department, what he's done on immigration, what he's done with race-based policies, as they call them. Those are some of the highlights that kind of caught my attention when 2025 first was getting noticed. So I don't have an answer for you. I'm sorry.
I do wonder if we're talking about the shift that you mentioned earlier, to sort of dismantling the administrative state, right? The sort of bureaucratic state of the federal government. If there is a sort of complementary push through this unitary executive theory towards increasing power of a certain kind in the federal government, particularly policing power, as we're seeing it deployed with various national guards to various cities around the U.S. Do you think that there is a likelihood of an increase in federal policing power, militarization, if you will, of the U.S.?
Yes, that seems to be a part of the long-term objective here in mobilizing the Guard the way that the president is doing. There's been joking about the National Gardeners in Washington, because the Guard really is not getting into the actual policing work that they might eventually get into in D.C. I think, again, the ICE the protests around ICE are giving more of a pretext and likely will get the Guard more into policing. Here in Illinois, because of the Trust Act and because of local ordinances in the city of Chicago in particular, there is resistance to allowing the Guard to be active on the streets doing traditional police work. There is a Illinois officials can't legally support ICE in terms of implementation of its deportation efforts, which are closely allied with what the Guard is. The Guard is, when they come to Chicago, if they come to Chicago, they'll start by protecting ICE facilities, et cetera, and enabling the ICE agents to do their jobs without interference from the public. There's plenty of people in the public here who would like to interfere and who are interfering in Chicago. This woman who sadly was shot a couple days ago was shot because she had rammed her car into an ICE vehicle, or blocked. I don't know if she rammed it. So those are ways in which the Guard could get active. Will the Guard be policing neighborhoods, walking around like a beat cop does? I doubt they'll have the resources to do that in a very high impact way. 300 Guard officers being sent to Chicago. At some point they're going to run. That's not enough to have a big impact in terms of how the streets are policed.
And they're not trained to do any kind of policing work.
They're not. Although if this is part of a longer term policy, one would presume that they'll give them some kind of training. But there's a big difference between the kind of what one might expect to be sort of slapdash kind of quick tutorial on how you act like a police person, as compared to police academy where you go for months and you have to qualify to get in, and it's a very rigorous training program. I mean,
and you have rights too, right, as a citizen in terms of how you engage with police officers. And I would sense that those waters get a little muddied when you're talking about your rights with respect to federal officials, DHS, ICE officers, or federalized National Guard troops.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned rights, because a huge part of the police training is about what rights does the public have when you deal with the public, and what are your rights as a police officer, say, for deadly use of force and for other things that police do. And so a cop who has gone through academy training at least has been exposed to what is legal and ethical, and that training at the academy is then reinforced with training during the course of their careers. Those standards are enforced by a police board in Chicago that enforces these things. Chicago is right now under a consent decree by which a serious effort could be more serious, but efforts are being made to raise the standards of policing in Chicago. So that's what a real police force does, and I strongly doubt that the National Guard would ever rise to the level of training. And so what's at stake there is not just a state's rights versus, or local rights versus federal power, but also just safety on the streets. Armed agents of the federal government who don't have adequate training, who may not know the rules of appropriate use of deadly force. It's a recipe for some really serious problems.
Already here. I mean, last week we had citizens have their Fourth Amendment rights violated by ICE because they're immigrant adjacent, because they lived in the same building and had their doors knocked down. Why is that not already a case that is wide in front of the population? That's what is so frustrating. We're talking
I think you're.
the state National Guard.
And ICE is
Well,
effectively
well-
acting like, yeah.
Well-
and we're thinking about or you're referring to the South Shore apartment
Yeah.
raid as well. That's I think a perfect case example of you've got search and seizure, you've got walls and doors knocked down, you've got people arrested, their belongings strewn about. That seems like a perfect case example of what could happen many times over.
Well, absolutely. And yes, when you ask, are they already here? Yes, ICE is here. The National Guard is not. But it's still the federal government.
They're effectively acting
yeah,
like our
yeah,
worst case scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a serious concern. People in the communities are doing what they can to prevent it, but the ICE is.
Why is there not an injunction against them at this point already in front of the courts? I don't understand. We talk about people getting frustrated in acting out.
Right.
They see that these things continue to progress. It's no longer just immigrants. It's now immigrant adjacent.
Right,
People.
exactly. Yeah.
Or racial profiling, right? We've also heard about that in terms of the Supreme Court sort of opening the door to more broad-based.
Can they not go to court?
So what? Yeah. What?
I mean,
I don't understand why we're not allowed to go to court when ICE is acting inappropriately and stop it. Why the governor doesn't do that?
So tell us about the.
Legalized a Kavanaugh stop. It's now legal to stop someone because they look like they are an immigrant.
Is it legal
Right.
to go into their
Well, before we get, I think these are great. These are great points being made. But before we get into a discussion of the legal strategy, I want to ask you: do you see, whether through the Attorney General's office or the governor's office, do you see the potential for some of our elected officials to take more of the legal route when it comes to protecting individual rights?
well, our policy team, BJ is known for the investigative journalism that we do. We also have a policy shop that works for more open, equitable, and accountable government. And just last week, I think Friday, policy called on the Attorney General, Kwame Rule, to investigate a couple of downstate sheriffs, one of whom is cooperating openly with ICE and is defying the Illinois Trust Act, which prohibits Illinois officials from providing support to ICE, from doing anything short of a legal warrant. They can facilitate pursuing a legal warrant, but ICE doesn't seek warrants. So we've called on Raul to investigate that. It's hard to, in answer to your question, it's hard so far the administration does seem to respect injunctions when courts enjoin the administration against doing something. By and large, the Trump administration has respected those injunctions. But again, there's a long-term strategy to get these various actions to the Supreme Court through use of the emergency docket, the
shadow docket.
The shadow docket.
Yep.
The certain members of the Supreme Court are unilaterally and individually making rulings that compromise the individual rights that people have. Those cases then are supposed to go to the full court for hearing, some of which will be heard in the term that begins this month. But again, given the constitution of this court, for people who object to what ICE is doing, I'm not sure this Supreme Court is going to deliver results that might satisfy you.
So it rests in basically relying on the lower courts to do what they can do for as long as they can do it.
Right, and what I think will be interesting is that when Supreme Court rulings come down, historically, once the Supremes have ruled on something, the circuit courts follow that to the letter. We haven't seen circuit court judges defy the Supreme Court in the past, but who knows in this day
So
and
now
age.
you're telling me we have to watch out for that as well.
Well, yeah,
because
that could happen.
Wow, wow.
But that's just a temporary act of I guess resistance. It's not going to
have a
longer
long-term
term
impact.
have an effect.
All right. Well, I know there's some good questions out here, so let me get to the back of the room.
Thank you so much for having this and for being here.
So glad to be here. Thank you.
My sister, for one, loves the current situation, and her byword or whatever has always been big government, big government. I don't like big government. I have never felt the hand of government so in my face as I do now. I've never felt the government being so big as it is now. It's seeping into every part of my life, and I just find that curious. So once again, I'm going to just ask, how can we push back? This is about pushback. And if you have to stay neutral, I respect that. But maybe, Joe, you can help us.
Well, David, what I'm interested in knowing is we've talked a little bit about the judicial strategy. How about the legislative strategy? And are there ways that you're finding electeds and those who elect them, meaning us, can use that power or that influence to really shape future outcomes? I'm thinking we've got an election next year, 2026, and how that might shape Congress, how that might shape at the state legislature level. What do you see as some of the possibilities through our elected officials to do some of this work of pushing back?
Well, Congress, the Republican majority in Congress is what at this point 1 or 2 seats. I mean, the midterms will really be significant in terms of whether Congress possibly can be a counterweight to the president. Clearly, Congress has decided not to be a player at all. That's in large measure because we've got Republican control of both houses, and even the Republicans who are critical of some things the president has done are not necessarily standing up in any meaningful way. At the state level, we're not as blue a state as it might seem, given that we have supermajorities of Democrats in both houses of the state legislature. We are a very badly gerrymandered state. Our electoral map has been drawn up specifically for the benefit of Democrats. But as anybody who's following the news knows, there's a big gerrymandering war going on, race to the bottom, I think, in terms of democracy, in an effort to fix the game before we have the midterms.
We've seen that in Texas and
right.
Some of the southern states, some of the other southern states as well.
And California is
California.
responding. Illinois, there's not a lot Illinois can do because we've so badly gerrymandered our state that
there's nothing left.
But from what I've seen, this gerrymandering battle is more or less going to wind up more or less even, although the Republicans have momentum and could end up expanding their hold on the House. So that, I mean, when you ask kind of what people can do, in Illinois, we can't, in terms of the congressional representation, can't make a lot of difference. But there's all kinds of people who go and canvass in swing districts elsewhere in the country, and that can be effective. Even if you're a visitor, people sometimes respect the fact, hey, you traveled to Ohio to knock on doors.
Yep.
That's a good thing. That can be effective. I would say also, and Joe and I have talked about this, historically, the clergy and faith communities have played huge roles in advancing progressive causes. I mean, we saw during the civil rights movement that religious leaders, not just Dr. King, but many others, were leaders of the movement toward civil rights. And we shouldn't neglect the power of our voices. We shouldn't neglect the power of faith communities to influence and inform people, to get people out on the streets. Demonstrations like we've seen periodically here in Chicago and elsewhere do have an effect and can influence the way people think. And we certainly saw that during the civil rights era. Obviously Selma, the Montgomery bus boycott, et cetera, et cetera. Public action can influence government outcomes, and it's a question of how do you organize yourselves around those efforts, and where do individuals, like people in this room, invest their personal time and talent and treasure in order to work for better.
I think that's well said, and I'll add to it that I think two things that I've seen work effectively in this time. One is the organizing of various faith communities across various lines of theological difference, and that organizing is actually happening now. I was at a luncheon earlier this week for one of those interfaith coalitions, and both pastors, rabbis, imams, religious and community leaders starting to band together so that we can, one, disseminate accurate information and to build the knowledge base of our communities so that they're aware of violations of civil rights when they're happening, that they're aware of inequities that are being created through policy and the implications of those policies for our community organizations and for our neighborhoods. So being able to band around that is, I think, very significant to beginning to change hearts and change minds, so that our neighbors are more effective advocates for sound public policy. And the more we watch, the more we see. I think the work that I've seen in videotaping and documenting various violations, especially as we've seen them in the last week, the work of journalists is incredibly key in this time, because you can't respond to what you don't know. Yeah. And now that we know more and more about the various violations and negative consequences of policies that are happening, now that we know, we're able to raise our voices in opposition. So I think that's significant as well. We might have time for maybe one or two other questions. I'm going to go over to this side.
So in advocating for civil disobedience to the current situation, that takes training and some discipline. The example from the civil rights movement, per se. I don't see any coordination here at all from the current pushback that we're seeing, including, it's an escalation. It's just predictable, and it's escalation, giving an excuse to bring in the guard. Are we going to see more coordinated efforts, or in our next discussion will we be looking at opportunities for that engagement as far as civil disobedience training?
Good question. I can speak to that one. Two things you should know. One is that there are a group of us working through the Mission and Justice Committee who have formed a rapid response team. And this is a team that can respond to needs of our neighbors, particularly through our community partners. If there are needs for us as congregants to be present for others, to accompany others through things like their immigration process or deportation hearings, or be present for public demonstrations through which we can voice our opposition to those policies which are hurting our neighbors and ourselves when it comes to civil rights. So there's some opportunity through that rapid response team to be able to join arms with our neighbors and to support them. And then through that, we are opening up opportunities for nonviolent direct action training. There are other congregations and coalitions that have made that kind of training available. And so if you're interested in seeking it out, please email me, jmorrow@fourthchurch.org. I'd be happy to talk more about that and to connect you. Okay? We are over time. I know some of you have some questions. And David, do you have a little bit of time if you had time to be up here?
So as we wrap, could I just make a couple comments?
Sure.
I was very struck by the reading at today's service from 2 Timothy. God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but rather a spirit of power and love and self-discipline. And the anecdote about Dr. King, the takeaway from that, which in King's words, what King said, God said to him, stand up for righteousness, stand up for truth, and God will be at your side forever. So I thought those were well-timed insights for us to take away from this conversation this morning. So thanks very much for attending.
Thank you, David. Thanks, everybody. Yes, don't forget to vote. And we'll also actually, once we get to next year, talk a little bit about what voter registration can look like and how we might help with that as well here at Fourth. Thanks, everybody. If you do have questions, David is up here for a little bit of time.